वन क्षेत्र को अनधिकृत रूप से, अनावश्यक रूप से अपने स्वार्थों की पूर्ति के लिए मानव काट रहा है, जंगलों को नष्ट किया जा रहा है। और जब प्रकृति से छेड़छाड़ मानव करेगा तो निश्चित रूप से उसके दुष्परिणाम भी मानव को झेलने पड़ेंगे, जिसका एक उदाहरण कोविड-19 आया है। इसलिए वर्तमान परिस्थितियों में ये अंतर्राष्ट्रीय सम्मेलन के माध्यम से होने वाला विमर्श महत्वपूर्ण है। संस्कृत में एक उक्ति है, वादे वादे जायते तत्वबोधा। वाद से, संवाद से, विमर्श से तत्व का बोध होता है, तत्व का ज्ञान होता है। मैं समझता हूं पूरे देश भर के 300 प्रेजेंटेशंस 23 देशों के विद्वान और वैज्ञानिक इस 4 दिवसीय विमर्श में अपने विचार, अपने पत्रों के माध्यम से रखेंगे तो निश्चित रूप से कुछ नई चीजें निकल कर आएंगी, जो इस पर्यावरण को सुरक्षित रखने में ऐसे उपाय सामने आएंगे कि हम पर्यावरण को कैसे सुरक्षित रख सकते हैं। और ये जगत इन विमर्शों से, इन विमर्शों के निष्कर्षों से निश्चित रूप से लाभान्वित होगा। मैं इस अवसर पर पुनः राजस्थान के सिंहद्वार, जिला अलवर, महाराजा भर्तृहरि मत्स्य विश्वविद्यालय अलवर से संबद्ध राजस्थान के एकमात्र स्वायत्त शासी महाविद्यालय राजऋषि महाविद्यालय के जुबली सभागार से उन्हें इस कॉन्फ्रेंस से जुड़े सभी सुधीजनों का हार्दिक अभिनंदन करता हूं, स्वागत करता हूं और इस कॉन्फ्रेंस के सफल होने की प्रभु से कामना करता हूं और इस कॉन्फ्रेंस को आरंभ करने की घोषणा करता हूं। जय हिंद, जय भारत।
For your address. insights and guidance you provide for all of us. Your words were animal and entertaining, motivating throughout and keep us moving. Your presence is encouraging to us. Now I witness Dr. Ranjana Soni, who with our confidence and head of the department in zoology, who has been holding our hands in all beginnings, and she has been advising us from time to time on all countries of the continent. Now, the thought of benevolence, affection, and respect, I would like to invite Dr. Ranjana Soni for her address. Namaste, all yours.
Thanks, Dr. Mata. This is our great pleasure to be able to understand concepts of basic concepts of environment and sustainable development after COVID-19 pandemic schedule to held on 16 to 18 December 2021. It's every great time to talk about the geological department. Who is the organizer of this internal conference? Geology department is situated within the campus of the college and was established in 1945 after 50 years of establishment of RRC in 1930. It was updated to postgraduate and took its glory in 1951. Names of programs, courses offered BSc, MSc, and PhD. The theme of the conference is multidisciplinary aspects of environment and sustainable development after COVID-19 pandemic. So it cannot be put in one box. This 4-day workshop is designed to provide and share the latest information and developments on environment and sustainable development for all these scientists, academicians, young researchers, businessmen, delegates, and students from all over the world. It would create an environment conducting information exchange, generation of new ideas, and acceleration of application that benefit society. We believe that our diverse and dynamic group of speakers and panelists will provide deep insight, knowledge, actionable and practical tools to brainstorm and discover new ideas, search for new skills, and a platform to show your capabilities and discoveries to the world. Our speakers representing key decision makers all around the academic institutions, healthcare, institute, pharmaceutical, biotech, CROS, supply chain, logistic as well as academic scholars and researchers to share our ideas and find new and more effective ways of action to evaluate the result and impact of environment and sustainable development. We are confident that you will enjoy a stimulating 2-day workshop and your presence and participation will help contribute to this vibrancy and enriched discussion around the theme developing professional for knowledge, exchange, insights, and collaborations. I hope the conference will be of professional and personal benefits to all of us as we proceed with our work towards a future food and agricultural situation that is sustainable and capable of providing food security and good environment to all of us for living. Once again, I am delighted to invite you all to take part in this conference and also to make the conference a grand success. And I hope that the experience in this event will be engraved in your memory. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am, for your words. Your words are very timely and encouraging. Now it's time for the first keynote address and first session of the conference. Our keynote speaker for this session is Professor Dr. C. Upendra Rao, and chairperson is Professor Dr. Hukam Singh Ji. Professor Dr. C. Upendra Rao is a professor of Sanskrit in the School of Sanskrit and Indic Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi, India. He was the chairperson of the Special Center for Sanskrit Studies at JNU and was on ICCR chair of Government of India as a visiting professor in Cambodia in 2016. He was the jury member of World Sanskrit Award Committee, ICCR, Government of India, and member Executive Court and Academic Councils of JNU. He was the Odisha State Coordinator of Non-Formal Sanskrit Education under MHRD, Government of India. Professor Rao edited and authored 22 books and research papers in Sanskrit, Pali, Hindi, Telugu, and English languages, and now working on Ramayana Indic studies, including the Sanskrit inscriptions of Cambodia. He received many awards and certificates of honors from various institutions of India and abroad, and this is quite big to mention here. Professor Dr. Hukam Singh Ji is presently posted as PG Principal at Raj Rishi Government Autonomous College, Alwar. He has 36 years of rich experience in teaching and research. He is a student-centric professor and wonderful teacher of Sanskrit and philosophy. He is a Dean of Arts, faculty, and member of Academic Council and Board of Management at Rajrishi Bhartri Matsya University, Alwar. He is a research guide. He has guided 31 PhD students and 6 ample dissertations. He has many national and international publications, along with 7 books at his credit. He has organized and has been a keynote speaker and chaired sessions in many national and international conferences, seminars, workshops, FDPs, and webinars. He is a very dynamic principal, and in his tenure of less than 1 year at RRC Alwar, college is taking leaps and bounds in academic and infrastructure development. Infrastructure development include high-mass sites in the college campus, new boundary wall, new laboratories, new girls' common room, revamping of college classrooms and existing laboratories. Academic depository of the college is enriched to commendable heights in his guidance, as Dr. Hukam Singh Ji is instrumental in organizing Gyan Ganga programs, which is an initiative of Commissionerate of College Education, Jaipur, to enhance the academic skill of the faculty member posted at government colleges, short-term training programs, international conference, and many seminars and webinars. Now, I request Dr. C. Upendra Rao to begin the keynote address. Sir, the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mamata Sharma ji. I'm glad to deliver the keynote address in the International Conference of Rajarshi College on the multidisciplinary aspects of environment and sustainable development after COVID-19 pandemic, organized by the Department of Geology. Please mute all other people. Mamata Sharma ji, please mute your mic. Other mic should be in mute. Please mute your mic. Thank you. I'm glad to participate in the international conference. The theme of this conference is multidisciplinary aspects of environment and sustainable development after COVID-19 pandemic, organized by the Department of Geology, Rajarshi Government Autonomous College, Alwar, in Rajasthan. The Rajarshi Government Autonomous College recently brought out the college magazine. I congratulate the principal, Dr. Hukum Singh ji, and teachers of Rajarshi Government Autonomous College.
Hello, sir. Please, there are two mics are on in your room. So this is requested to all. Please switch off. Please mute your mic.
Yeah, I was repeatedly requesting.
Yeah, thank you.
Busy. Yeah, please let me be ensure mics are muted or not. Now mics are muted. Okay. I hope so. Okay. Thank you. Be careful because on online conferences, you should have some experience. Also, you should be very, very alert. Thank you so much. The Rajarshi Government College is organizing multidisciplinary aspect, a conference, international conference today on multidisciplinary aspects of environment and sustainable development after COVID-19 pandemic. This conference is being organized by the Department of Zoology in Rajarshi Government Autonomous College, Alwar, which is situated in Rajasthan. The Rajarshi Government Autonomous College recently brought out the college magazine, and I congratulate the principal and teachers of Rajarshi Government Autonomous College for bringing out the college magazine named Vinay. The Rajarshi Government Autonomous Science College, situated in Alwar, is one of the prestigious colleges of Rajasthan. It is the most significant science college affiliated to the Rajarshi Bhartrhari Matsya University of Alwar. I appreciate the noble efforts of Professor Hukam Singh ji, the principal, for his tireless efforts in bringing out the magazine and also today organizing the 2 days huge international conference. I also applaud the efforts of college teachers in glorifying the academic excellence of this college. Because teachers are the backbone of any institutions. Teachers from immemorial times have caused in achieving India's state of role model for other countries. The relationship between teacher and pupil is very pious. We had great teachers in India. Several Indian teachers in the past have entered in other countries and spread the highest knowledge. Indian teachers who were invited to China and the Indian teachers who were invited to Tibet were highly respected in ancient times. Our ancestors gave importance to their teachers. Taittiriya Upanishads says, Acharya Devo Bhava. Sri Rama used to respect his family teacher Vasishtha. In later period, great teachers like Valmiki, Vyasa have shown their glories by writing great poems like Ramayana and Mahabharata. Teachers are highly revered in ancient India. Today, we face various kinds of problems due to forgetting the importance of teachers. Therefore, one has to understand the glory of teachers always and respect them. Because all this I remembered after entering into your online conference, which is being organized by the teachers of the college. Also, we have to understand the importance of the science in our life. Science is one of the most important passages of knowledge. It has a specific role and a variety of functions for the benefit of our society. Science helps us create new knowledge, improving education, and increasing the quality of our lives. Today, I'm glad to participate and deliver the keynote address in your international conference on multidisciplinary aspects of environment and sustainable development after COVID-19 pandemic. You have rightly mentioned in your brochure that the healthier our ecosystems are, the healthier the planet and its people. Yes, this is true. For maintaining a healthier planet, we need healthier ecosystems because ecosystems support life on Earth. Indian civilization contains environmental conservation. The sages of past, our Indian sages in the past, have always had great respect for the nature. They perceived that all matter is the manifestation of Supreme Soul. All social and cultural activities in ancient India have some ecological implications. People think, why I'm telling all these things, people generally think that preservation of ecological systems, conservation, all these are new concepts. But we should understand that we are neglecting the nature. But our ancestors were very, very, very keen on preservation and and also the maintained ecological systems in ancient India. Our ancient sages have extended their relationship from the social environment, treating rivers as their mothers, forests as their gods, and all creatures as their brethren. You might have seen that we respect rivers, mountains, trees as gods and goddesses. That is how they use importance to the nature. Our rishis always believed that trees could bring peace and prosperity to the world. There are several post-COVID symptoms, such as imbalance in mental activities, difficulty in breathing, tiresomeness, difficulty in concentration, cough, chest and stomach pains, headaches. All these things are post-COVID symptoms. Recently, I have attended one international conference in Nalanda. One scientist from America was referring all these symptoms, the post-COVID symptoms. Very meticulously, they have impacted this pandemic situation has imbalanced with the mental activities. That is very, very important. So, what is the solution? How to get rid of all these problems by resorting our ancient systems? Our ancient Indian life, which is well preserved in the Sanskrit literature, can help to eradicate the post-COVID adverse symptoms. Rigveda has dealt upon various components of the ecosystem and their importance. The Atharva Veda informs us to identify the value of air, water, and green plants. These are the essential for maintaining human existence. It is said in Atharva Veda that plants and herbs destroy pollution. You might have heard the Vedic mantra, Om Jau Shanti, Antariksham Shanti, Prithvi Shanti, Apas Shanti, Oshadhaya Shanti. These are all actually very, very important hymns from the Vedas. And the problem is we have forgotten to scientific meanings of these mantras. So, therefore, I'm saying to you today, the Atharva Veda says that plants and herbs destroy the pollution. Some of the herbs can also purify the air. That is why plants are very, very important for the purification of our atmosphere. Thus, we have to revive our ancient scientific way of life. Today, we need to revive the ancient scientific way of life to solve the post-COVID human problems. We have to adopt our scientific way of life once again, because being influenced by the Western civilization, we have started neglecting our own lifestyle. Yogic tradition should be traced back. Yogic tradition is very, very important in this perspective, in this context, because yoga talks about the mind, yoga talks about the breathing in and breathing out, pranayama. All these are very important to face the post-COVID pandemic situations today. And when we talk about the yoga tradition should be traced back to the oldest Indian text, Rig Veda. Many people think that Patanjali has invented the yoga and he started yoga. But it's not. Yoga was very, very ancient. You can see the yoga from Rig Veda period. And yoga speaks about the yoking of our mind with the Supreme Soul, yoga. Yoga means yoking. Sage Vasishtha, Yajnavalkya were the early teachers of the yoga. In Bhagavad Gita, yesterday was the Bhagavad Gita Jayanti, the Vaikuntha Ekadashi. And Bhagavad Gita very nicely explains the yoga. So in Bhagavad Gita, it is mentioned that Lord Krishna himself was a great yogin. You can see in Bhagavad Gita, Yogeshwara Krishna. Bhagavad Gita sung by him is nothing but the Yoga Shastra. The vast array of techniques for achieving the mental balance is very, very possible, very much possible through the yoga system. But the Buddhist masters always, you see, even Buddha speaks about the yoga. Buddhist masters cautioned that they have not given much importance to Hatha Yoga because they did not give importance to the body. Because they say you should not give much importance to body because body is perishable. It is a kshanika. It is a momentary. But poet Kalidasa says that no, you should not neglect the body because body is the first means to achieve the dharma. Sharira madhyam khalu dharma sadhanam. So we cannot neglect the body. So yoga is not limited to body. Yoga is limited to body and mind. It is completely for the body and mind. But unfortunately, some people are thinking yoga is only for the maintenance of the body. It's not. So in India, yoga has been an admirable form of application through the ages. In the Vedic period, the term yoga was used for yoking, joining and tying together. This meaning in the course of period began to imply fixing the mind upon the object. In a passage in the Kathopanishad, yoga stands to control the senses and calming the mind. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna himself says that yoga is very important for the human beings. The Yoga Darshana mainly concentrates on the mind and its control. Because supreme liberation or kaivalya can be obtained only through the help of mind. Sage Patanjali therefore begins his treatise Yoga Shastra, Yoga's Chittavritti Nirodha. The Chittavritti Nirodha here refers to calming the mind through meditation techniques. By relaxing these mental fluctuations, the yogi opens himself to experience his genuine nature, and later he feels union with the absolute reality. The central teachings of the Buddha are based on the very proclamation. That means the same yoga. Buddha speaks in a better manner. Other than the yoga masters in ancient India, he says that Mano Pubangama Dhamma Mano Setta Manomaya. Manasache paduttena bhasativa karotiva tatonam dukkhamanveti chakkamba bahato padam. So he speaks very nicely. What Buddha says is, all phenomena have mind as their forerunner. They all are mind-made. If one speaks or acts with the evil mind, then suffering will follow, just as the wheels of the cart follow the footsteps of the bull. So in this way, everybody in ancient India gave importance to the yoga. And why I am speaking of yoga today? Because in post-COVID situations, the yoga is one of the best solutions. And when you are speaking about these ecosystems, you should open our ancient texts once again. Because our ancient texts very clearly, very elaboratively, they gave importance to our ecosystems. And as Professor Hukam Singh Ji is your principal from our Sanskrit discipline, let me take this opportunity to explain you from many years in India. It's a great misconception that on Sanskrit is the language of only Karma Kanda, and Sanskrit was the language. We have treated it like that. This is our great mistake. In fact, Sanskrit was the language of the science in ancient India. You must know that there are many scientific books written in Sanskrit language. We have astrology, astronomy. We have Ayurveda. The entire Ayurveda system, medical system is preserved in Sanskrit language. Varahamihira and Bhaskaracharya and Bhoja writes the Samarangana Sutradhara. Several texts are there in Sanskrit. You must understand, all faculty and students of Rajarshi College should understand that Sanskrit was the language of the science in ancient India. Unfortunately, we have limited it to the Karma Kanda today. I don't know how it happened, but this is not the true. Because Sanskrit, our ancestors, whatever these ecosystems I was telling you, whatever they have discussed the scientific problems, they have taken Sanskrit as their means, as a medium of the language. Why? Because the great scientific expressions can be easily explained through Sanskrit language. That is the importance of Sanskrit language. That is the nature of Sanskrit language. And this conference has a specific role and variety of functions for the benefit of our society, creating new knowledge, improving education, and increasing the quality of our life. Once again, I congratulate Professor Hukam Singh Ji, Professor Mamata Sharma Ji, and his staff members, all other staff members, for this ideal effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I would like to ask the chairperson of the section, Dr. Hukam Singh, to conclude the first keynote conference. So your participation by your
इनको थैंक यू बोलना है थैंक्स करना है ना इनको
श्रद्धेय प्रख्यात विद्वान गुरुवर संस्कृत और पाली के निष्णात विद्वान प्रोफेसर राव साहब, न केवल इंडिया में बल्कि विश्व में सिद्ध हस्ताक्षर है। मेरा सौभाग्य है कि आप जैसे महान व्यक्तित्व का सानिध्य मुझे मिलता रहा है। प्रोफेसर राव ने अपने उद्बोधन में कोविड-19 महामारी के बाद पर्यावरण और सतत विकास पर अपना विमर्श प्रेषित किया। मंजिल एक होती है लेकिन रास्ते पृथक पृथक। प्रोफेसर राव ने भाषाओं की जननी संस्कृत भाषा के आकर से कतिपय उदाहरण यथा ऋग्वेद, अथर्ववेद, वैदिक साहित्य से गीता, आचार्य पतंजलि, कतिपय उदाहरणों से महाकवि कालिदास के साहित्य के कतिपय उदाहरणों से ये सिद्ध किया कि जो विमर्श हम आज कर रहे हैं ये हमारे साहित्य में वैदिक साहित्य से लेकर सतत आज तक रचित साहित्य में मनीषियों द्वारा, आचार्यों द्वारा भरपूर मात्रा में उपलब्ध है। यदि अंधे को खंबा नहीं दिखे तो खंबे का क्या दोष है। अर्थात ये दुर्भाग्य रहा इस देश का कि हमारे साहित्य में मौजूद तत्वों को, बिंदुओं को हम उनका अर्थ समझ नहीं पाए। वस्तुतः यदि ऐसा नहीं होता अतीत में यह देश विश्व गुरु नहीं कहलाता। प्रोफेसर राव साहब ने अपने उद्बोधन में पर्यावरण को शुद्ध और सुरक्षित रखने के लिए हमें जागरूक किया, चेताया, जो महत जरूरी है। मैं इस अवसर पर प्रोफेसर राव साहब को हृदय से उनके प्रति आभार ज्ञापित करता हूं कि उन्होंने अपने बहुमूल्य समय में समय निकालकर हमारे इस अंतर्राष्ट्रीय विमर्श सम्मेलन के प्रथम कीनोट स्पीकर बनकर हमें संबल दिया, हमें प्रोत्साहित किया। इस तरफ मैं आपको नमन करता हूँ। जय हिंद, जय हिंद, जय भारत, जय भारत।
Thank you so much, Hukum Singh.
Thank you, Dr. Rao, Dr. Hukum Singh ji. The knowledge you shared has added glory to ICMS. Thank you once again. Now we move on to the second keynote address of the conference to be delivered by Dr. S.J. Sora, Executive Director, National Institute of Pharmaceutical Education and Research, Raebareli, Lucknow Campus, UP. He also held an additional charge of Mohali for 1.5 years. He got his PhD from Industrial Toxicology Center, Lucknow, India, and was a postdoctoral research associate at Utah State University, USA. He served for nearly 29 years at Defense Research and Development Organization, DRDO, at Gwalior, India, before taking up the present position. His most highlighted contributions include the development of a new drug for treating cases of arsenic poisoning. The drug was approved by Drug Controller General of India in 2014 for human trials. Phase 1 human trial of a drug was completed by Cadila Pharma. He has published more than 350 research papers, 14 patents to his credit. There are more than 50,000 citations of his work. Dr. Sora has a scientific edge index of 61. That's amazing. And serves an associate editor and member editorial board of nearly 29 international journals. He has edited 5 books and was awarded with the prestigious DRDO Scientist of the Year award. He also was conferred with the prestigious Dr. Kailash Nath Karjo Award of Madhya Pradesh Government, Shakuntala Ambirchand Award of Indian Council of Medical Research, Society of Toxicology, and Academy of Biology and Pharmacy Lifetime Achievement Award in Toxicology and Pharmacy. Now, the session will be chaired by Dr. Prajnesh Parmar. Dr. Prajnesh Parmar is an additional professor and head of the Department of Forensic Medicine and Toxicology at All India Institute of Medical Sciences, BB Nagar, Hyderabad. He has a rich teaching experience of 14 years. He has completed his FAIMER and advanced course in ME successfully. Dr. Parmar secured first rank in MD, Forensic Medicine, and second rank in PGDHL, which is just applaudable. IC is lifetime member of AFMET, AHPE, AHA, INPAFO, KAMLS. He is an editorial board in various reputed journals of forensic medicine. He has 79 publications at his credit and has an Edge index of 11 and IN index of 12. That is so amazing. Dr. Parmar is the faculty in charge of finance and also the chairperson of Official Language Committee at AIMS PB Nagar. He is a wonderful doctor who is loved among his students and cast an impression on everyone he meets. Now I would request Dr. S.J. Flora to start the keynote address. Sir, stage is all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Mamta. First of all, I appreciate your invitation, and I am overwhelmed with getting an invitation from you, and then particularly, I think most of you may not be aware that I have a very close association with Alwar. I have seen the growth and development of Alwar because I used to come to Alwar about 3 decades before, because my brother is in Alwar for last 35 years. He's working in Aishar. So I have seen the growth of this very silent, sleepy city of Alwar in Rajasthan. So thanks again for bringing me back to Alwar. I thought that perhaps if I get a chance to come in person to Alwar, that would be great. But I think I'll make sure that next time that I am in Alwar, I'll definitely like to come and visit your college, because I've seen this college from outside, not have entered this college. So thanks once again, and I also thanks Professor Hukum Singh for this wonderful opportunity. Little bit was confused because I was not sure whether the audience are students or students of various disciplines, or they are only science students. So I was just struggling with my presentation. And nice to see Dr. Jaswinder Sandhu also from Canada. I must be very late night there in Canada. So Dr. Sandhu, it was a pleasure listening to Dr. Rupendra Rao's lecture at the beginning. I think it's a very welcome decision on part of Dr. Mamta to start this session with a my lecture and my talk. As I said at the beginning, I was a little bit struggling that what should be the topic. So then I thought that I'll split my talk into 2 parts. One will be that how difficult it is drug development part, because this has been my area of work, because I have mostly worked in DRDO Defense Research Institute, and then moving over to NIPER, that is the National Institute of Pharmaceutical Education. And perhaps I must correct to Dr. Mamta that I am not executive director, but I am ex-director. I just superannuated, or rather retired from NIPER just few months back. So at both at DRDO as well as in NIPER, my major research interest was drug development. It's a very tricky, what I should say, area to choose. Because tricky, why I say tricky is for the reason that there are not many people who even think of venturing into such areas, because it's a very tough, difficult area. But anyway, I must share here, because once I was a student of PhD, I got my PhD from Toxicology Research Institute in Lucknow. So my professor said that choose a topic which you can bring to a logical end. Don't choose a topic which you just work till your PhD and then forget about it. So that teaching and the learning which I had at the beginning, I stuck to that. Though working at DRDO was a difficult task in the different sense, because my area of work was on chemical warfare or biological warfare agent, but still I never left this drug development part even in DRDO. And I would say that yes, after working for nearly 3 decades, the drug which I have worked has not yet come to a logical end, but I think it's very near to the logical end. It requires another 2 or 3 years of another hard work, which I should say, and then I hope that the drug will come to the market. So what I like to share here is that I like to share the journey which I took about 4 decades back, and the journey of 4 decades I have to sum up, I think, in 45 or 50 minutes. And I will try to show only few slides that how this journey started, and then from bench side to bedside, this drug has come to a position now. And it's good to see that at least that this college and where Dr. Mamta Sharma is working, and she herself is at environmental toxicology. I think I must be very sure that there may be some students there who are working on environmental toxicology. It might be of some benefit to the students particularly. And the first part is about the drug development. So just give me a few seconds to upload my slides. Are you able to see my slides? Hello? My slides are visible, still not visible.
Slides are not visible, no?
Yes, sir. Visible है, sir.
You can see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Okay, just sorry for taking little time to upload these slides. See, my entire journey has been on developing a drug for arsenic poisoning. And as the topic of this, or rather the theme of this conference is on environmental and sustainable development after COVID-19 pandemic. So I think we still need to wait for some more time till this pandemic is over to exactly know that what has been the impact of this deadly pandemic. But as United Nations has described this, I think there is a lot of disturbance in the background. I think everybody has to mute their mic. United Nations says that we are facing a global health crisis unlike any of the 75-year history of the United Nations. One that is spreading human suffering, infecting the global economy and upending people's life. This is the definition of United Nations, and there is no doubt about it that this pandemic has created a lot of, it's a rather havoc it has created all over the world. Now, before I talk about the impact of this pandemic on environmental aspects, perhaps there is a little bit of blessing in disguise. I mean, I won't say that this pandemic has caused any beneficial effects, but I think you talk about noise pollution, you talk about water pollution, you talk about soil pollution. There are a number of other pollutions which I think has decreased immensely. Particularly the environmental pollution has decreased immensely during this pandemic time because of the lockdown, because of many other, but it has also created, beside many other problems all over the world, there have been problems with the environmental management. And I'll start with waste management. As you can all see that there has been waste, which includes medical waste, household waste. Why there is so much disturbance? It's creating problems. Medical waste, household and other hazardous waste. And since there was a lockdown, the disposal of all this waste became a problem, not only in India, but I think all over the world.
दे देंगे उससे लाइव चलाना
I don't know, there are people who have not yet muted. To minimize possible secondary impact, I think it's causing a lot of problem for me to give my lecture unless and until people mute their, because there is an echo here. And then second major problem has been the disposal of plastic and reusable items. As you all know, because of hospitals were all full, there have been problems in the hospitals, and the fight against the plastic pollution became more terrible because of COVID-19 pandemic, as the use of disposable masks, gloves, and other protective equipment increased manyfold. And you all know that plastic does not inherently make something clean and safe. So this was one of the major problems during this pandemic. And experts are proposing to bring your own cups scheme, in particularly there in hospitals. And then the exposure to hazardous substances. So housing around migrant workers, as you all know, perhaps it happened in Uttar Pradesh, when workers who were coming back from their workplace, from Delhi, from many other places, and they were walking down to their hometown, they were disinfected with bleach. This was, I think, in the United Nations word, it was a ghastly and most inhuman practice, which was taken up to combat COVID-19. So this exposure to hazardous substances was one of the things perhaps which happened in India and which should have been avoided, to say the least. Now, as you all know, and I think your principal also talked about that during this pandemic, we have to give credit to our scientists for bringing a vaccine within a couple of years, and the vaccine came into the market. So although vaccine development, like drug development, takes almost like 2 to 3 decades to bring it to the market, but this is a credit to our scientists, our own Indian scientists, who brought not only one vaccine, but they brought 2 vaccines into the market. Likewise, I'd like to talk a little bit about the drug development part. Drug development is what you call, in a very common language, is a treatment of any disease. You all will appreciate that during the 20th century, we have, rather globally, medical research has observed enormous advances. But this advance has not been a corresponding success in the development of a drug in the medical practice. What I mean to say in a very layman's language, there have been a lot of efforts as far as research is concerned. Research has gone many leap and bound, but it has not transformed into a product. And there has been a lot of stress in last 2 decades or 3 decades. When I was in DRDO, there has been a lot of stress also in developing a product. And the reason was that most of the research was abruptly interrupted in between. It never being brought to the logical end. And that's one reason that there has been frustration, there has been a dearth of money, which has not led to a development of a product. And when I talk about product, I mean drug. So this, the line which I have given in red is the WHO line, which says that it takes minimum 17 to 20 years to develop a drug from molecule to the market. And only 14% of new scientific discoveries enter day-to-day clinical practice. And this 14% is not meant for India, because if I talk about India, the drug development has been only 1 to 2% of new scientific discovery which enter day-to-day clinical practice. And why I say so is very briefly summarized in this particular slide. As you can see, most of the academic institution, I mean, it's again, I'm not trying to blame anybody, or I'm trying to tell that, okay, there has not been a lack of efforts on part of researchers or in part of faculty, but most of the academic institution, as you can see, they start with bang. They say that, okay, we have developed a new drug, which could be a good drug for the treatment of diabetes. Just for one example I'm talking about. If you see the literature being part of the editorial board of number of international journal, I see number of papers coming from South Asia or Southeastern Asia, or rather from India, talking about that they have got a molecule or they got a herbal drug which is very useful for the treatment of diabetes or cardiovascular disease or many other diseases. But what happens, they talk about this for 1 year or 2 years, and then it slowly fades down. As you can see, on the left side, there is innovation. So the innovation claims are being made from most of the academic institution, and academic institution means universities, research institution, government institutions. And you can see in the pharma sector, there is only few claims are being made as far as innovations are concerned. It's not that their R&D is lacking in something, but they pick up only those molecules which they, in their opinion, are very promising, and they pick only those molecules which has already gone through the preclinical work. So academic institution and government institution, they take up the studies, and what happens, most of the molecules, they die their own death after preclinical stage. Preclinical means during the research part, which takes most of the time, because it takes around 10 to 15 years to complete the preclinical study. And then once the preclinical studies are over, as you can see in the from the academic sector, only few molecules come at the stage of phase 1 trial. There are 3 phases of clinical trials. Once a molecule has been approved by Drug Controller General of India, they just allow you to go through phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trial. I think most of you may be aware of what is phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trial. Phase 1 is the safety part. Phase 2 is where 300 patients are treated with the molecules on the new drug. And phase 3 is more than 3,000 drugs, 3,000 patients are to be treated by that drug which you are talking about. And then comes the data, and then regulatory approval is given. As you can see, the pharma sector will start with very small number of molecules, but they end up with a large part of molecules which has been approved by the regulatory body, and they come into the market. And hardly any molecules which goes through all the preclinical studies, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trial, and then come into the market. So as you can see, in the last 70, 80 years, in India, there are very few molecules which has come into the market from Indian academic institution or government institution, which is totally different in North America and many other European countries, where there is a lot of interaction between industry and academia. And this is what I emphasize here. We require to have academia industry interaction in order to achieve much more goal. But it has own problems, which I think will be discussed in a later part in some other forum. So there are 4 stages of translational research. One is basic research, where you synthesize the molecules and do all sort of preclinical studies, like its characterization, its isolation from any herbal plant or any other thing. This is what you call a basic research. And then comes the animal studies, which takes a lot of your time to complete animal studies, which takes around 10 years or 12 years. And then comes the clinical trial, that what I just talked about, the phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trial. And once it has gone through all the 3 stages and the regulatory body has given this permission, then it comes into the market. So this is what you call from bench to bedside. So just for the sake of students, translation word refers to the application of the result of basic biomedical research to the practice of medicine, starting from bench and coming to the bedside. It is the process of converting discoveries made in the laboratory into the clinical intervention. clinical intervention is, it is in the market for the treatment of any particular disease. So the aim of translational research is to produce new therapeutics. New therapeutics means the new drugs. Medical devices. Medical devices includes number of stunts which you all know about. Tools for diagnostic diseases. This is one aspect perhaps where we are lacking a lot, that how to diagnose disease at the early stages. This is our major problem. What happens, you go to a doctor and then you talk about the symptoms. Okay, I'm suffering with this disease. A doctor will start giving you symptomatic treatment, most of the time, symptomatic treatment. And then, and once I talk about this symptomatic treatment, I'm talking about the toxicology part, or when you are exposed to any polluting agent or a toxicant, where this diagnosis becomes a problem. And then avenue for community engagement research is required. Now, why there is a problem? As I said at the beginning of my lecture, the clinical research people don't take up this work for many reasons, because it involves high cost. Why I was successful, or why I was partially successful, is for the reason, being a DRDO, I got all the help as far as financial help was concerned. But in the most of the other institutions or other universities or even college level, since it requires a lot of material infrastructure to do clinical research, the cost is very, very high. And then comes the long timeline to drug discovery. As I said, WHO says it requires minimum 17 to 20 years to bring a drug from molecules to the bedside. So 20 years and $300 million is WHO says it requires one basic research to bring it to the market level. Complex regulatory component. This is another huge problem, because once you have done all the preclinical study, you have done animal experimentation, you have to go to drug controller journal. A drug controller journal gives you a list of number of parameters which you have to fulfill, and the requirement is immense, and it takes minimum, particularly to me, it took almost like 5 years to get the regulatory approval from drug controller general, or in US it calls FDA. The clinical research plays a critical role in translating discoveries and novel finding into new and better treatment. So this is what you call it. It's a very tough, but I urge the youngsters particularly to take up this work as a challenge, where you feel that you are passionate enough to take up this challenge and you feel that you can bring it to the logical end. There may be ups and downs in your career, your research, but if you are passionate enough, I think this is a area perhaps which requires passion from youngsters. So now you can see the new drugs in drug discovery and development halved roughly every 9 years since 1950. As you can see, this has been because the problem has been that regulatory authorities has also become very, very tough. And the reason for being toughness is because they want the drug which you have developed should be safe. So as I said in the second line, you can see that toxicity is a common reason for the frustrating decline. The reason is most of the drugs, they are which has been developed, and it has gone through the animal studies, it has gone through the basic research. But once it comes to the safety aspects, and most of the drugs fails because of the toxicity aspect. The drug itself becomes toxic. So you cannot treat a disease with a toxic drug. So the drug needs to be safe, as has happened with the case of vaccine. The vaccine which you have injected or given to a patient should be safe. It should not create its own toxicity in human beings. So that's one reason that the drug discovery has declined many-fold during last 10 to 20 years. So translation medicine integrate clinical research with modern methodology. And this is one reason that you require proteomics, metabolomic, and pharmacomic, transcriptomic, and high throughput image analysis. Now it has gone through such an immense modernization on the new infrastructure, new tools has come where you can even find it out whether the drug is safe. And You can do immense research now. I mean, most of the Indian research, particularly I'm talking about the NIPERS, where you have all the equipments to generate all this computational biology, genomics, proteomics, such type of studies. You can find it out and find it out whether the drug is safe from all aspects. Now I will give one example. This is my second part of my talk, in which I have worked. And I have worked on finding a new drug for arsenic. Arsenic has been a huge problem in India, Bangladesh, and adjoining countries, Taiwan. Even in US, I have been to US. There are 1 or 2 areas in US where there have been a huge problem, particularly in North Dakota, and there is one more state where arsenic problem. Even in Canada, there have been reports that arsenic has been in the groundwater, has created a lot of problems, and it has led to a number of diseases, particularly liver and skin cancer. Now the regulatory recommendations are, WHO says that drinking water should not have more than 10 microgram per liter of arsenic. But it's ironical that in most of the areas where arsenic poisoning, cases of arsenic poisoning has occurred, the level of arsenic in the groundwater has crossed more than 300 to 3000 ppb. It has happened particularly in Bangladesh, in Taiwan, and in some part of India, also in the eastern part of India. And what you can say, that you can see on the right side, in Argentina, there have been reports of 200 and more than 200 ppb of arsenic in the groundwater in Argentina. In Mexico, there have been reports of 400 ppb. Taiwan, it's almost like 2000 ppb. And Indo-Bangladesh region, there has been more than 800 ppb of arsenic, which has been reported in drinking water. Once I said drinking water means this level has been detected in groundwater. Now, why there is a need for the drug? It all started, I think, long back in 1970, when in Bangladesh, WHO started a shallow groundwater well program. They started digging some wells, and the WHO took up this project, and huge money was given to the government of Bangladesh. And once they were doing this shallow groundwater well program, what they found that in some of the areas, the arsenic concentration was much more than 300 ppb, and they got scared. They said that if the level is 10 microgram per liter and it is showing 300, it means that there is a huge problem. And then in 1980s, they started a first health program was started. And in 1993, almost like 13 years it took, that when they stopped this shallow groundwater well program, and then they found that there are almost like 35 to 77 million people in Bangladesh and eastern part of India. Eastern part of India means East Bangladesh, West Bengal, where they estimated that it's almost like 77 million people. They are already suffering, or they are at the risk of getting arsenic poisoning. And as per the latest report, it says that it is almost like 90 million people, they are already suffering with arsenic poisoning. You go to Bangladesh and you go to Calcutta hospitals, IPGMR, this is the biggest hospital there in Calcutta, where they have found, you can find that almost like 2 kilometers long line is there in the morning itself. And most of the people, they have either skin cancer or they are suffering with arsenic poisoning. This is the situation there. As you can see, I have summarized this slide in this particular aspect. 75 million, this is, I think, about 5 years old report. Latest report says that it's almost like 70 or 90 or 90 to 1 billion people in India and Bangladesh. And then there are 50 million people worldwide. Now this 50 has now become almost like 70 million. And these are some of the states, West Bengal, Bihar, UP, which are more badly affected by arsenic poisoning. My purpose is not to scare anybody, but the problem is, this problem is there, which has to be tackled in a very religious way. Otherwise, the problem may become a problem, a huge problem in next 10 years or so. This red part, I think if you can see the bottom part of the right side of the slide, you can see the red part. This is a map of West Bengal, and the red part shows the arsenic concentration in the drinking water or in the groundwater is more than 300 ppb. Now, there is another thing which I'd like to discuss here. In Rajasthan and many a part of the other part of the country, we have noticed that since no such type of epidemiological surveys have been conducted, so we never know that how much is arsenic is there in the groundwater. Only once the patients comes to the forefront and they tell that these are our problems and they show some sign and symptoms, then only we know that there has been some. So we need to analyze the groundwater, particularly in Rajasthan. I have been visiting Rajasthan for many years, and I found that fluoride concentration is very, very high in Jaipur area or adjoining areas of Jaipur. So these problems are there. Now, this is one of the reasons for the problem not being diagnosed earlier. You can see there are 4 stages. One is called preclinical stages. And you can see the children are playing and they are not showing any sign of arsenic poisoning. They are just look like healthy, but it doesn't mean that they are not drinking arsenic contaminated water, because the problem is that the arsenic starts showing its symptoms only after 2 or 3 years, and that is what you call initial stages. And in the initial stages, you get white patches on your palm. That is what you call melanosis and leukomelanosis. And then the second stage comes, and this second stage comes only after 10 years or 12 years of continuous exposure to high arsenic in the drinking water. And these symptoms, which is called hyperkeratosis, this comes only after 10 years, minimum 10 years of, which is called second stage of arsenic poisoning. And then comes the last stage, where you get lesion and tumors, and then skin cancer, and you are left with no choice, and the person is left to die because there is no treatment in the market for treatment of even second stage or last stage. When I say there is no treatment, I mean that there is no treatment globally available for the treatment of second stage or last stage of arsenic poisoning. And children are particularly more vulnerable. And now comes the area in which I worked for these many years, that is called chelation therapy. As I said, therapeutic aspect is therapy is called treatment. And for treatment of arsenic poisoning or for the treatment of any metal poisoning cases, you call chelation. And in a very layman language, it can be shown or can be described in this particular slide, where this word chelation has 2 words, that is chelate, it means claw of a lobster, and it's a very simple inorganic chemistry where the 2 molecules of a drug binds with 1 molecule of metal, and this metal, once it binds, it releases the in vivo binding site. In vivo binding site means the binding site in your body is released, and metal, the chelating drugs forms a complex, and this complex comes out of the system. This is a very simple way of describing chelation therapy. So in order to have an ideal chelating drug, you need to have this drug have a greater affinity and low toxicity. Greater affinity means it should bind the metal which is there in your body in a much more stronger way than where it is already bound in the body. It should have a low toxicity, as I said at the beginning. Its ability to compete with natural chelators. Natural chelators means the enzymes which are there in your body, because metal cannot be in a free form. It should be bound to some enzyme. It may be bound to some proteins. So it should be more powerful than the natural chelator. Then only it will be able to break that bond, and then it will bind with the metal and it will come out of the system, either through urine or through feces. Then ability to penetrate cell membrane. So if arsenic is there in your brain, or it is there in the fetus, then it should be able to break that blood-brain barrier. It should be able to break that cell membrane in order to go inside the cell membrane and bring the metal out. It should be rapid elimination of the toxic metal. It should come out of the system. It should come out of your body quickly, because the more it will be there in the body, it will create toxicity. High water solubility, capacity to form non-toxic complexes. So these are all the properties a drug should have. These are some of the list of some of the drugs which are there in the market. Kindly let me know when I have to stop. So now these are drugs which are listed on the left side. These are the drugs which are there in the market. But these are drugs which has been approved by United States FDA or European regulatory bodies. But what it has been that none of these drugs have been found to be effective in the treatment of arsenic poisoning. Once I say arsenic poisoning, I mean to say chronic arsenic poisoning. Once a person is exposed to more than 10 years, the person becomes chronically exposed to the toxic. So the drugs which are there in the market, in a very layman language, I will try to explain. The drugs which are there in the market in US and in Europe, they are good as long as arsenic there in the blood circulation. But once it has gone into the cell and gone deep into the cell, it becomes very difficult to bind that drug, because none of these drugs listed on the left side are able to penetrate the cell membrane and goes inside the cell to bring arsenic out. Because in chronic cases of arsenic poisoning, most of the arsenic is not there in blood circulation. It has gone deep into the cell. Either it is a hard tissue or it is the soft tissue. These are the structure of some of the drugs. Particularly on the bottom, you see we have written DMSA. This is a drug which has been approved by US FDA. About in 1992, this drug was approved for arsenic poisoning. And on the two other drugs, DMPS and DEPA. These are the two drugs also been approved by US FDA. And this is a DMPS is a Russian drug. D-penicillamine is a universal drug which is can be treated for many other ailments also. Now, these are the problems associated with these existing drugs. The first drug, which is calcium disodium EDTA, which I have written on the left side, this is a drug which redistributes arsenic to brain. What I mean to say by redistribution, it takes out arsenic from soft tissue like liver, kidneys, and it redistributes into the brain. And this is a hard tissue mobilizer. Second is, it is a highly teratogenic. Teratogenic, most of the student of zoology must be understanding it very well. Teratogenic means it causes toxicity to the fetus. And then non-specificity. Non-specificity, it removes arsenic from the system, but it also removes most of the other zinc, essential metals also, like zinc, copper. So in one hand, you are treating a patient for arsenic poisoning, but also causing lot of essential metal imbalance like zinc, copper, iron, cobalt, and manganese. Now the problem with this second drug is, this is extracellular distribution. Extracellular distribution means this distribution is mostly remains in the blood circulation. It is not able to go inside the cell or take arsenic from the intracellular side. So this drug is not good for treatment of chronic poisoning. Limited clinical recoveries. Once I say limited clinical recovery, I mean that you are treating a patient, but arsenic has come out, but the person, if he has become mentally retarded, or it has become a case of skin cancer, or it has become he has developed a, what you can say, a tumor, whether it can treat mental retardation, it can treat cancer also, is a big question mark. Nobody has done such type of study. So though the drug has been approved for treatment of acute poisoning means a person who has got exposed to a high dose and immediately has been diagnosed and he has been treated, this drug is wonderful. But if there is a case of chronic poisoning, this drug is no use. Now, I follow two strategies. One is I took up the challenge long back, about 30 years back. I took up the challenge that I will develop a new drug. And second was that till I get a new drug, let us see what I can do. So I worked on two aspects. I developed a new molecule, and then I worked on combination subjects. So just briefly, I'll go through that how I worked. Now, this is a very no, should not be a very complicated slide. You can see on the left side there are three names I have written: BAL, DMSA, and DMPS. These are the drugs which are approved by United States Food and Drug Administration. Now this BAL full name is British anti-Lewisite. This drug was developed by Britishers to treat arsine poisoning. Arsine was used by Germans against Britishers during World War II, and arsine is a gas, and they use this as a chemical warfare agent to invade, or they try to kill British army people with this arsine gas. So the British scientists, they developed a drug, and they gave the name British anti-Lewisite. So since arsine contains arsenic also, so this drug is good for treatment of arsenic poisoning. Now what happened? After 10 years or 15 years, what scientists found that this BAL is a highly toxic drug. Once they treated the patient, that the patients became more toxic, their kidney was damaged, there was a redistribution of arsenic from liver to brain. So they said, okay, this drug is no good. So they worked on two other analogs. The two new analogs of British anti-Lewisite that were developed, DMSA and DMPS. And they worked for almost like 20 years on these two drug analogs, DMSA and DMPS. These two analogs are analogs of British anti-Lewisite. So these two drugs were developed, and they were approved by US FDA for the treatment of arsenic poisoning. Now, once I tried these two drugs against arsenic poisoning, and I treated some patients with these two drugs, what I found that these drugs are no use for the treatment of chronic arsenic poisoning. And most of the patients which I treated in West Bengal and in Bangladesh, they showed no sign of improvement. So then I thought, why it is not working? The reason was that this drug is a hydrophobic drug. So the distribution remains in the extracellular spaces. Extracellular means it is in the blood circulation. It remains in the blood circulation. It never goes inside the cell. So I thought, if I make this drug DMSA lipophilic in nature, and most of the students who are for BSc or MSc level, they know that lipophilic means you increase the chain length, carbon chain length, and once you increase the carbon chain length, it becomes lipophilic. It goes inside, it penetrates the cell membrane and goes inside the cell. So I prepared, or rather my team synthesized almost like 9 analogs of DMSA. Same thing, it started from BAL, it went to DMSA, and then it became 9 analogs of DMSA were prepared. What I did, I added these two carboxylic groups. You can see there are two OH groups, and then they were esterified and esterified with alcohol. Either it was a monoisomyl alcohol, monomethyl alcohol, monocyclohexyl. So likewise, 9 analog esterification was done, and carbon chain length was increased. Out of these 9 analogs, first of all, I tried to make both our OH group esterified, so became diesters. So diesters worked very well, and they were able to go inside the cell and take arsenic out. So I thought, I was jumping. I thought, okay, I have achieved a big breakthrough. But once again, the toxicity part of these drugs were tested, it became very, very toxic. So you all know, perhaps all the master students and BSc students, they know the more is the lipophilicity of a drug, more is the toxicity. So all my 5-10 years of work became zero, and then we started working again, and then we thought, let us block one OH group and esterify the other one. Again, 9 analogs were prepared. Again, we went to the lab. Again, we tried it against animal studies, and out of 9 analogs, we came out with one drug, that is what we call MIA. MIA is monoisoamyl DMSA. So DMSA remains the same, the two sulfur hydride group which binds arsenic remained the same, but the drug was able to go inside the cell and take arsenic out. And this is just a summary of number of animal studies. I think we have published almost like 100 public papers or more than 150 papers on this particular drug. Almost like 25 students, my PhD students worked on that. And I must make a very candid, what you call it, appreciation to all my students, that because of their work, and we published in one of the topmost journal of the world. And the reason was, and I again urge most of you, or most of the youngsters particularly, to publish your work in one of the topmost journal, because you send it to a good journal or a class journal, a world #1 ranked journal, what you get, even if your paper has been rejected, at least you will be able to get 2 or 3 pages of comments, which will be like a teacher to you, and you will be able to learn from the comments which you get from the experts. So this was one reason that I always thought that if my work is good. See, one thing I must tell to all my young colleagues, that we may not be matching with the infrastructure facilities which US or many other developed countries have, but our brain, or we can match with any of the countries, and we can always match their brain, and we can find it out what are the new things which can work, on which we can work. And this is what we thought, that perhaps the drug was the same, the analysis the same. We thought a very simple chemistry was done. We prepared a lipophilic compounds of the drug which are been approved. And you can see that we published almost 150 papers in world's top ranked journal. I think I must say that none of the papers which was not published in a C grade journal or a D grade journal, they all were published. So once the animal studies were done and we published almost like 150 papers on this, then we started working on different aspects, that which route would be the best route to administer this drug. So we tried number of routes. We tried intravenous route, we tried parenteral route, we tried oral route, and to our satisfaction, or rather to our utter surprise, a pleasant surprise, we got that oral route was the best route for the administration of drug. Why it was good to give this drug through the oral route? Because once you give it to the oral route, it remains in the systemic circulation for a long time. And once it remains in the system for a long time, it gets enough time to bind the circulating arsenic in the body. So you give it through intravenous route, to give it to a parenteral route, the drug will come out of the system quickly. So it hardly gets time to bind with the circulating arsenic. So once it gives through the oral route, and I think I will show one of the 2 slides where we have done pharmacodynamic of the study, and that pharmacodynamic study clearly suggested that the drug remains in the system for pretty long. Now, this is again, and then once we have done with it, we thought that we have got enough data, we have got enough papers where we have shown that this drug is very good in removing arsenic from the intracellular sites, from inside the cell, it's inside the heart tissues. We thought, let us see that what is the clinical recoveries. And once I say clinical recoveries, means what is the effect of this drug on arsenic exposed mice or brain or other animals on brain, on heart, on liver, on tumors. Although developing a tumor it was a tough task, but even to that extent we did some in vitro studies on tumors, and we took tumor cell lines, and then this is all a part of a number of preclinical studies which we conducted. As you can see, this is we even went to the extent that we try to see that what is the effect on arsenic-induced mitochondrial dysfunction, neural apoptosis. Neural apoptosis is nothing but programmed cell death, and this is the effect on heart. I'm showing only very few slides. There are, I think, if I talk about this, is a 30 years of my journey, so I'm trying to sum up in only an hour or so. So this is a study which we did on heart. And then once we are done with all preclinical studies, we were satisfied that we have got enough data, we have got enough strength or confidence to go to Drug Controller General. So then Drug Controller General, again, as I said at the beginning, they gave us a list of parameters which we have to do. And that is primarily focused on safety part. And then once you have safety, these are the data which you have to generate for regulatory body. They asked us to do 14 days oral toxicity. And once you say these are the parameters which you have to do, it shows the toxicity of drug only, not arsenic. So only the toxicity of drug was established. 14 days oral toxicity, 90 days oral toxicity, subacute or acute toxicity, reproductive toxicity, teratogenicity, mutation, and so many things which you have to do. So this data, again, I gave it to 2 or 3 students only to work on the safety part. And then entire safety aspects were studied. This is a summary of all the safety part. Again, it took almost 4 to 5 years for me to develop or generate all the data for safety of this particular drug. As you can see, oral LD50. Oral LD50 means oral lethal dose 50, a dose which should kill 50% of the population. As you can see, in case of our drug, the oral LD50 was 1000 milligram per kg. Compared to the toxicity of DMSA, which is a US FDA drug. You can always question me that, sir, it is very toxic. Your drug is toxic because it's 1 gram at 13.2. So the more is the value here, more safe is the drug. But we checked with the drug controller and they said 1000 milligram per kg is acceptable. So go ahead. There was no major effect of this drug on liver, kidney, and brain. So as far as the toxicity of this drug is concerned, there was no major problem with the liver, kidney, and brain. And then essential metal imbalance. As I said, most of the other drugs were able to remove arsenic. Beside arsenic, there are a number of other essential metals were removed. In our case, only copper was, the copper depletion was there. Otherwise, there was no major problem. Then no redistribution of arsenic from one organ to another. Acute and chronic toxicity study, it was safe. No teratogenic effect, again safe. And then we conducted pharmacokinetic data also. Then I'll tell you, this is one of the most novel work which we conducted. Why I say novel is for the reason that once we published this paper in this journal, this is a US journal, and they said this is the first study where human stem cells were used, embryonic bodies were used to test the efficacy of a drug. And we found that comparing with the animal studies, these human stem cells work exactly the same way. And this is the first reported studies where human cell-derived embryonic bodies were used as a drug testing model. And this is one of the most highlighted work of ours, which was published in 2009. And recently we conducted urinary bladder, because arsenic causes urinary bladder cancer. So this is one of the students was given this work to find it out how this drug work on arsenic-induced urinary bladder carcinogenesis. And we found that this drug is not to that extent which we expected, but again, it still works. The work is still going on, so we have not yet been able to complete this study. Now, generating 15 years of data, we went to Drug Controller General. This is what we call CDSCO. And we gave entire data to Drug Controller General and asked them to give us permission to conduct clinical trials. And then clinical trials were conducted with Cadila Pharma. Cadila Pharma was our industrial partner, and they conducted the phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3 trials of the drug. And phase 2 trial, up to phase 2 trial, this is all data which was generated in Apollo Hospital in Ahmedabad and in Cadila, with a collaboration with this. And of course, this is a hardcore pharmacology, and I think I'd not go through all this hardcore pharmacology, but the end result was the drug was safe, and after oral administration, its retention in circulation was longer than it was given through oral route. So it's just substantiated what we got in animal study. The same what we got in human studies also. And then the entire work was submitted to the Drug Controller General, and they gave us permission to conduct this clinical trial. Phase 1 trial is already over. Phase 2 is almost going to be over, and only one trial is left. And then I think this will be first drug in the world to treat cases of chronic arsenic poisoning. And this is what, just in brief, I was. And this is how the drug which we prepared. This is a permission letter which we got from there. And then this is a book which I have published just with Elsewhere Academic Press, US. And for this drug, our group was given our honorable Defense Minister, Parikar Saab, because he was, I was in DRDO, he gave us a Scientist of the Year prize for this novel drug discovery. So this is all about what we have already done. And the last part is that how this is a new drug which we developed. Still, it has to come into the market. Hopefully, in 2 to 3 years, this drug will come into the market. But till we get a drug, this is a combination treatment which I just take for 1 or 2 or 3 minutes more. We tried an antioxidant, which I think most of the students can also take up this. Most of the antioxidants and most of the herbal drugs also work very effectively against arsenic. You can see that N-acetylcysteine works very nicely, and this is how, till we get a new drug, I think we are giving N-acetylcysteine to the patients in Bangladesh and our eastern part of India, West Bengal, because this is a very effective drug. It has got a sulfide group, so it works very well in early cases of arsenic poisoning. Lipoic acid is one, and then a combination of 2 drugs we tried, the drug which was approved by US FDA and the drug which we have developed. And I'll sum up in very quickly in this particular slide where you can see on the top panel the drug which was developed by US. You can see it. This is a drug which is a lipophobic in nature. It goes only into the extracellular compartment, binds arsenic, and it comes out. And but in case of our drug, it is a lipophilic drug. It goes both into the extracellular compartment and also it goes to the intracellular compartment and binds arsenic, and it comes out of the system in urine or in feces. So this is how we work. So the conclusion is that once you are working on this type of drug, it's not important that only you should see that arsenic is getting removed from the system. You should see that clinical recoveries are also there. It is effective in mental retardation. It is effective in improving your mental status, cardiac system, liver cancer. So I can say with confidence that this drug is a future drug of choice for arsenic. This will be the first drug which will be developed from India again in the global market if it comes into the market in next 2 to 3 years. And then we have to give antioxidant supplementation. So this is my entire team, 28 students got PhD under my guidance. This is all about my work. So any questions, doubts, if you have? That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. And being a toxicologist, what I could have more asked you than hearing you. It's a bliss to us. And secondly, I have a bit affiliation with ITRC Lucknow as well, because I had worked on obstetrico-toxicology. And if you remember people, Dr. Siddiqui and Dr. Saxena.
Yeah, very well.
Yeah. So they taught me GLC, how to use it, because I was working on that instrument, and I'm from Rajasthan University, Jaipur. So I went there in Lucknow, stayed there for a week, and understood how to install GLC. And it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mamta. Thank you very much.
So now I would request Dr. Pragnesh Parmar, who is the chair of this session, to kindly conclude the session. Dr. Pragnesh Parmar.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, please, Dr.
Yeah, sir.
Parmar.
Thank you very much, sir, for excellent session. It was really, really great work in the field of arsenic. As from the field of forensic medicine and toxicology, we are routinely sometime getting such cases, and
Sure.
it is difficult. In medical doctors also, they are not aware of much regarding treatment and what
Yes.
the treatment available in the market, what the antidote is available. Because toxicology is somewhat neglected part in medical curriculum also,
Yes.
because in medicine also they are not teaching much, and it is somehow affiliated with forensic medicine, and forensic medicine are not treating on hand. So it is
Yeah.
one of the not that much developed part in the Indian scenario compared to the
Yes.
Western world. And
Sure.
such a remarkable work on a new drug which can treat the chronic arsenic poisoning is, this is really a remarkable job, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for
Thank you,
excellent
Dr.
session.
Parmar. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
So thanks to both of you. It's pleasure to have you here. Now we move on to third keynote address of the conference, which is to be delivered by Dr. Mona Taman. Dr. Mona Taman is working as a vice chairman of Future Leaders International Group in Egypt and Kuwait. She's a member and lecturer of the Arab Society of Material Sciences of the Institute of Higher Studies and Research and a consultant in education technology and development at Guidepoint, an international American consulting company. Dr. Taman is also a chairman of the Commission for Sustainable Development of Arab African European Union for Human Resources and Development and a coordinator of the innovation competition for Sheikha Fadia Al Sabah in Egypt. She has worked as a faculty of politics and economics, the University of Alexandria, and as a journals member of editorial board as a reviewer in Global Research and Development, Journal of Engineering. She is a winner of Global Teachers Award 2021, the Outstanding International Digital Educator Award 2021, Best Leader of the Year 2021, and she has also received the Creativity Award of Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed for the year 2013 by designing and programming an electronic learning game. This session would be chaired by Dr. Rashmi Tyagi. Dr. Rashmi Tyagi is a science communicator who is highly qualified and experienced educator. She has been in the field of education for the last 25 years. She has done graduation from PHU, post-graduation PhD in chemistry from IIT Roorkee. She's a gold medalist at BEd and did MEd from Mumbai University. She takes keen interest in research work. She has held diverse positions in the academic arena. She has taught chemistry at degree level in the prestigious universities like MS University Baroda, University of Mumbai. She has developed professional competencies through training programs at IIM. She has attended numerous orientation programs and workshops in the field of teaching and learning science. She has also presented her papers in various fields like chemistry, environmental science, rural agricultural practices, innovative teaching methods, nanotechnology, pedagogy, etc. She has brought tremendous change in many rural school environments. She is organizing camps for spreading awareness among rural women about breast cancer and health consciousness. She is giving trainings to teachers and students regarding scientific skills, life skills, adolescent education, work education, problem solving skills, and stress management. She has received Ideal Principal Award in Education for the year 2012. For the past 10 years, she is working on the scientific awareness in the rural areas of Maharashtra. She has launched a project on indigenous advantages on the cow urine and dung, sponsored by Malshes Niketan, Mumbai. So, I welcome you, Dr. Mona Taman, to India, and I request you to start the session. Dr. Mona Taman, stages are yours.
Hello. Hello.
We can hear
Hello.
you, ma'am.
Yes. Good afternoon. Good afternoon and good morning from Egypt. I'm so happy to participate in this session. Welcome to everyone, and thank you for all organizers for this conference. I will share my knowledge about the pandemic and after pandemic COVID-19 and the in education part. Can I share my slide, please?
Yes. It was a video.
Now my screen is visible. You see my screen now?
Yes.
Not visible? Okay. Okay. Now it's hot. Yes, now visible. Okay. My in knowledge or in education part after pandemic, after COVID-19 or now, education became more digitalization, more digital, and in after come to school, our students and teachers and university after come back, education be more and more, and we will develop an education and use more digital in education, and education become digital education, and also students become digital students because we use digitalization and e-learning in through COVID-19. So we must increase using the digital or technology in education. So the first or the more interested part in education or any part is augmented reality. Augmented reality is become a very very important part. We must all know or have more knowledge about it. And I will present how augmented reality become. First, virtual reality. First, virtual reality. We can use this is pieces or as a glass to see in like this one. A person or educator or students wear this glass to be in a virtual, to see knowledge, to go through the world and to see anything in virtual way with virtual reality. With increasing the technology, virtual reality become augmented reality or AR technology. What is the difference between virtual reality and in virtual reality? We go to a virtual environment, but augmented reality we become or bring virtual uses in a real environment. So augmented reality become uses more than virtual reality with this way and with more technology. Like this one, we can use it in our environment. So many parties or all parties in education use this technology, use these tools to learn, to educate, and to be physically and to be and convert curriculum to be more reality and to be more funny also. So as a part of architecture or design or part of biology and also mathematical in all parties. I will say about architecture for AR, how they can use this one. They can use augmented reality to develop building, to develop real estate, to design as a more and more interactive architecture. So augmented reality or AR be very more useful for all parties in education and in also for architecture designer. So all this building was virtual. All this building created by a simpler edu. So we can use building before build it. We can see our organization before build it. We can go to it in a virtual way. After, like this one, after that, mixed reality is a more and more new technology in virtual way. We all hear about metaverse. Metaverse, about what is the meaning of metaverse, is a mixed reality between virtual reality and augmented reality. Metaverse will convert all the world to be an amazing way to contact together in a virtual way, to go to any place, to travel any city, or to travel any country in your home. This is metaverse. We see that we can wear a glass but this is a glass different than virtual reality. The glasses is instead of your laptop, is instead of your mobile. We just wear this glass from Microsoft. When we wear this glass, we can interact for any knowledge. We can interact with any person around the world. We can control virtually in any devices, and also we can control in any person or interact with any person around the world virtually. This is the become world, metaverse, or mixed reality is between augmented and virtual reality. It is the newest technology and is a very important and very, very useful to reduce the distance between the countries, reduce the distance between controller and manager, and reduce the distance between students and their teacher. So also it will be used in any or more, in all societies or in all uses. So like hospital with XR or mixed reality or metaverse, hospitals converted to smart hospital. How doctor, how teacher, how engineer, how be smart. We can say this video for as example for uses augmented reality and mixed reality. In 2050, all will be smart, all subject, all office, all countries, all managers will be smart. We see this one. This is in a smart hospital. All things all virtually. This is glass. We can use it in anything, in any organization. So it will reduce dangerous, it will manage time, and it will reduce using time. It will be more and more useful for any part in our life. So doctors can experiment and they can make experiments virtually. Online interact, decision support, automated process, patient self-serve. we can see this video. This is as a future of digitalization, is a future of metaverse or future of mixed reality or XR digital. Okay, now it is an example for using a simpler edu, how we can design this smart, how we can design this new technology with in our curriculum or in architecture or for engineering or for doctors, how we can design this new